viewers, we are going to be touching on one of the issues today, which is very sensitive to some extent, and also it is an issue that talks throughout the world at this moment, the phenomena at this moment going on, and also we have a risk type of issues being categorized under the safeguarding issues. We are going to be talking about radicalization. We are going to be touching on prevent agenda, as well as we want to see how community actually proactively or not proactively embracing the prevent agenda, and we want to dissect the reason behind of their acceptance and not acceptance of the prevent agenda that's been introduced a few years back by the previous administration. However, it's been evolved after previous administration, and now it's been segregated throughout the country to make sure that the whole entire community actually embed prevent agenda to safeguard our young people as well as citizens. So thank you for joining us. I'm privileged to introduce one of a lawyer here who is expert in this field, and also who has been representing two of the young women who flew out of Syria in January 2015, and his name is Tasnime Akunjee. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to our show. Mr. Akunjee, what we want to do is to dissect some of the issues behind the prevent agenda, and then we will be looking at what are the storyline in terms of young women that actually flew out of London to Syria, and what happened between British administration and the Turkish administration in between. And I know you are in a better position to talk about that. You appeared in the House of Commons Select Committee in order to face question through the scrutiny review panel and so on. So could you kindly touch on, in terms of the prevent agenda, how it has been accepted in the community, wider Muslim community, rather than only focusing on Bangladeshi community?
Well, first let me express my gratitude in having me as a guest here. It's a great honor for me to be here with you. In terms of the prevent agenda and its uptake in the community, well, that's not been so good. And there are many faceted reasons for that, but particularly because prevent is meant to be a policy by the government that's supposed to tackle violent extremism. Well, certainly it started as violent extremism, and as you said in the introduction, the idea of prevent has evolved quite a lot actually since previous administrations through the current one, and under all its guises the difficulty has always been one of trust. Now, prevent is only one element of an overall strategy, and that strategy is called contest. It's meant to be in place, which involves the police, security services, social workers, and actually everybody, in terms of combating the danger of extremism. Now, prevent comes at the beginning. It is meant to be a sub-criminal aspect to these things, and there's another part of it which is called channel. Quite different, but they're all part of the overall umbrella called contest. Now, channel itself is a bespoke approach to people who have been already identified as on the, let's say, extremism radar. The authorities then bring resources to that individual and tailor those resources to that person's individual needs. And conceptually, there can be no argument about that. That seems to be a very good idea. In terms of the data from that, whether that's transpired, that it's been successful or not, is quite cloaked in secrecy, so we don't actually know. But as I say, intellectually, conceptually, quite an unarguable matter. Prevent, on the other hand, is a different fish. It is the concept that the government's put out that puts a duty on the police, or social services, now, as of 2016 anyway, schools, universities, everyone who has a public-facing engagement to combat and remove safe spaces from extremist voices so they can't be heard. The problem with prevent was that it's securitization issue. So where it was meant to be a sub-criminal sort of tool, it has always involved police from the very off.
Sure.
In addition to that, in its early stages, when prevent funding was engaging with the community or community organizations, it often was linked to spying, issues of spying. So the money would be allocated to a mosque, let's say, and that mosque was then told that it needs to, let's say, buy security cameras. and have regular meetings with police.
So there is a compromise in terms of data protection to some extent, is it?
There's that, but there's more the question in the minds of the community is if it's meant to help the community, why is it only focusing on detection, yeah, or so-called detection, spying and the infrastructure around that? The police already have that. The police are there to do that task. Security services do that task, and it appeared to the community across the country that, in fact, it was to co-opt those community organizations into being part of the security establishment, and that's not their role. They have always worked with the trust of the community, mosques, social workers, youth workers, indeed, and they were always the people that the community could go to talk about their issues without fear of consequence, without being judged. Prevent converted those people into informants, effectively, as far as the community were aware. So the issue in terms of whether it's a good idea to engage with community in order to combat violent extremism, of course, it's a great idea, conceptually. Problem was that it was incepted under a country or a regime, or Tony Blair's regime, which itself hasn't had much credibility in wider issues, particularly in terms of the war on terror narrative. So it's not that surprising.
Also, question can be asked whether community were consulted thoroughly prior to embedding or coming up with the PREVENT agenda, because there is a significant resilience attitude from the Muslim community about the PREVENT agenda and so on.
Well, I mean, the key sort of architects behind this, the PREVENT agenda, were always from the very beginning. It was Majid Nawaz and the Quilliam Foundation. Now, we have seen roundly that the Quilliam Foundation has been rejected by most elements of the Muslim community anywhere.
So why do you think the government actually involved some people to design a program that is meant to safeguard young people as well as any citizen, adult as well, by a cohort of people? Those are not necessarily in touch with the community, and especially Muslim community. There isn't a very much evidence to that extent. They actually consulted Muslim community throughout the country to develop PREVENT agenda, which absolutely, in terms of your term, of course, the whole idea of PREVENT is about safeguarding young people and safeguarding citizens. So to that extent, in such a way that the community shouldn't be feeling threatened because of the PREVENT agenda, because it is designed to safeguard them. So what do you think the government actually left out a big portion of people when it comes to consultation, thorough consultation in relation to embedding PREVENT agenda? Is that the reason why there is a degree of reservation from the community?
That's true as well, but it's a complex relationship between the Muslim community and government. And one of the real problems that we have is that we don't have that many representatives from our communities in government. We have but a handful of MPs that might even be themselves personally aware of the issues. So quite a limited representation there. Of them, the small number are split between different parties with their own, political, let's say, point scoring going on. So we have very little representation in government. That's the first thing. The second thing is that governments often like to just hear their own voice.
So it's not designed in a very inclusive way, if you like.
No, the theory was that it should be. The practice was that it certainly wasn't.
Right.
And the problem is we had individuals who were putting themselves forward as experts or leaders in the Muslim community who had very little or nothing to do with the Muslim community. And that, frankly, was business for them. It wasn't something that they were motivated to engage in because of some moral cause or because of some social need. They were motivated predominantly from what we can see financially. So if your organization is being paid to advise about a problem, the organization's purpose will continue as long as the problem continues.
To maximize the profit out of it.
So they will never give you the solution. They're not financially motivated to. They're financially motivated to create a bigger problem or to at least express the problem as bigger than it is.
What I wanted to touch on, based on what you said, so what I understand from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, I understand PREVENT agenda, it is a collective issue, the community, whether it's a white, non-white, Muslim, non-Muslim, we all should be acting together to make sure any of our young people or any of our adults are safeguarded in relation to that. But yet what we have seen, there is a significant rise in relation to radicalization. We have seen, and we will touch on it soon, We have seen rise in radicalization in different parts of UK. Does it come down to the failure of embedding prevent agenda, or does it come down to simply the Muslim community showing a degree of resilience towards prevent?
Well, no, I don't think it's fair just to focus on the Muslim community. And the reason for that is because Prevent is not, on the face of it, designed purely for the Muslim community. It's meant to cover all sorts of radicalization.
The Muslim community, big portion of Muslim community don't actually see it that way, do they?
No, that's because that's actually not been experienced. In the theory is that it covers everybody. The theory is it covers also individuals on the right wing. So to stop young British kids, or white kids in this case, joining, far-right
or spreading
organizations.
hate crime and everything else. So
Indeed, but when we look at the allocation of resources behind it, the focus has been disproportionately on the Muslim community and very little on the right wing. In fact, the security services have made a point of this repeatedly, that the right wing are on the rise. That's despite Prevent, and Prevent was designed, or in theory,
to tackle extremism.
that. So effectively what we have is extremism on the right wing going up, and extremism on the Muslim side of perspectives going up as well, which those two together prove statistically Prevent is a complete failure.
Right. Okay, on that note, when we say the Prevent seems like in the community is not been embedded properly, I have spoken to a lot of youth workers, and I have spoken to a lot of people who actually works with young people. They have a significant reservation when it comes to delivering Prevent agenda with young people openly and in a transparent manner, because there is a degree of condition attached to the Prevent agenda. Yes. For example, they have to be compromising with the data sharing protocol. And who wants to share this data when you are talking about British values and the citizenship with a young person who is 13 years old? Is it really fair on this worker, and is it really fair on this 13 years old kid that the name and address should be given to someone else to spy them when we are talking about education, really?
I mean, you cite education, that's one element of it, but we also have with doctors, with nurses, with dentists, anyone who's dealing with the public, and teachers and at university as well. Now, they are now under a duty to provide this information as well. And we have seen academics, professors who have conducted studies on this, and generally leaders in those areas of doctors and professors and teachers who are highly critical, highly resistant, even though it's now a duty on them, because they know, because they're best placed to know, that this is massively corrosive to the relationship between either patient and doctor, pupil and teacher, student and professor. It destroys the relationship, because there's no trust.
Right.
And we have the concept of patient-doctor confidentiality.
Absolutely.
If it weren't for that, then we would not be able to detect psychiatric issues, domestic violence, any sort of problems in terms of sexual in nature. People simply wouldn't talk about these with their doctors if it wasn't private.
And also I picked up one of the issues that you mentioned, even though Prevent agenda has been laid out to very many different institutions and very many professionals to identify the signs and dealing with that. Have they been actually trained to identify the sign of radicalization? Do they know what it is about? I mean, I don't expect, being a teacher, I'm not a teacher, but if I'm a teacher, I only know how to teach physics and maths, if that's what my subject to teach. I do not know what is the sign of radicalization, and how do I spot someone if they're showing the symptoms of some radicalization? I mean, was it clear to very many different professionals, not only school teachers, youth workers, teachers, social workers, and so on?
Well, the professions generally have spoken about the limited amount of information they were given around this and training. It's very limited. The government rolled out recently a website called the Prevent Against Hate. This is on the back of David Cameron's comments that he believed, qualified belief, but he believed that because 20% of Muslim women don't speak English, that contributes towards radicalization.
But to some extent, there is also a perception, isn't it? 20% Muslim women do not know how to speak in English. What kind of culture or what kind of situation he has been living in, talking about 20% Muslim women do not speak in English? That could have been probably 15 years ago would have been right.
We don't know where the figures come from.
Right, exactly. So that's why I'm confused a bit.
Anyone who is involved professionally in English language and delivery would not stick to the 20%
right.
figure. Yeah. So But in terms of where he gets his figures from, he can only say. But that's something he said publicly. Literally a day later, the so-called government answer to educating professionals and parents about extremism was in the Prevent Against Hate website. The funny thing was that this website's only available in English. So if the problem is that people don't speak English,
then why are you putting something in English again?
So this is an example of the misthinking around this. Having looked at the website myself and the materials, they're very, very basic in nature. Now the fact is that in terms of all of the studies, Davos, MI5 recently had a leak of internal research. What it shows is that there's no one factor that dictates that someone will be radicalized or go off. The only factor that's common amongst all is that somebody in the friendship circle has been radicalized and has done something extreme like going off to Syria to fight. That's the only factor. So this is why we go back to Channel and why that's a useful program, because it's bespoke. Each person has their own problems.
And it's got wraparound support services available.
But where you have something like a blanket that's rolled out like Prevent, well, that by definition simply won't work because it's one size fits all. And this problem is like a psychiatric one in that you can't have a rolled out psychiatric program. You have to have a professional who assesses the person and then brings the relevant issues to bear on it.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for explaining about the Prevent agenda, why it has been accepted, and to some extent why it has not been accepted by the committee people and so on. I think we learned a great deal from what you said. One of the issues that I wanted to touch on is that we know for a fact when school kids are excluded from mainstream school, they tend to go to PRU, which is People Referral Unit, which is the alternative education provision. And according to Ofsted, they are meant to attend 25 hours minimum a week to focus on core curricular subject. Unfortunately, very many different, it's not only in Tower Hamlets, and very many different boroughs, when kids are excluded from school and put into alternative education provision, it doesn't seem to me they attend 25 hours a week. So that means there is a degree of missing during the daytime. Not necessarily they're missing, but we know for a fact 140,000 young people gets missing every year. That's been recorded in the Home Office. So this missing is about not necessarily disappearing, but it's missing maybe 3 hours in a day, because these are the one I'm talking about, the 25 hours they're supposed to attend, but actually they are not attending 25 hours. Do you think the local authority should be focusing thoroughly in terms of monitoring if they are excluded from mainstream school? What we have seen is a significant gap between thrown out of mainstream school and accessing alternative provision. That's about 3 to 4 months. So there is a degree of missing correlation exists. And at the same time, when kids gets placed in alternative education provision, they don't seem to attend 25 hours. They are somewhere else. So there is also a missing. And what we understand, there is a correlation between missing children, grooming, and radicalization. What's your opinion on that?
Well, in terms of the people I've dealt with, none of the girls or none of the children that we've dealt with were actually missing from school, or indeed were bad students or excluded in any way. In fact, it's the opposite. They were extremely bright.
So you are talking about the mainstream school they were attending and so on.
Okay. So, by all accounts, they were extremely intelligent people, highly academic, personable. They had all the skill sets to be successful in the future. And yet, they appear to have been radicalized, and they appear to have been pulled in by this propaganda coming from Syria by ISIS.
But I personally feel no 14 years old will ever be tempted to be radicalized, knowing the fact where a country, which is Syria, in the middle of war zone, someone is going to go there to seek for heaven, unless or until some form of grooming actually taken place behind the scene. Sure. Do you think there is a degree of correlation between grooming and the radicalization?
Grooming is a loaded term. It's a term that's been captured by issues to do with, let's say, sex gangs in Rochdale and Manchester. So it's now been imbibed with not just that, but also things like Jimmy Savile and that sort of problem. So the term has now moved on into a specific issue. When we say grooming in terms of radicalization, that happens in many different ways. There is direct online grooming by people, men, who are looking for women for marriage. And they're targeting vulnerable young girls, often from backgrounds where a relationship is something that's going to be only in the context of marriage, and those young girls will be quite religious in nature in terms of these things. And so, and often because of cultural reasons, they may feel that they don't have so much control over who their husbands are. Now, imagine a young strapping man from the battlefields of Syria, gun in hand, muscles bulging, on the internet, speaking to this young girl. It's, you know, it's maybe visually more appealing than a 35-year-old man of limited means from Bangladesh, for example. So when he is speaking to this young girl, often she will feel that she can at least exercise some choice over who she marries, rather than her default position where she feels she can't. Now, choice is the biggest issue in the human being's existence. The fact that they can have some control over their lives and their future. In a context where people say Britain gives all these freedoms and opportunities, true, but not for everybody. And certainly young girls, in a context where they may be feeling that there's forced marriage, or certainly strong correlation about who their families pick for marriage, they don't feel that choice, they don't feel that freedom. In fact, the freedom that appears is on the computer screen with a man. However, that's one type, specific type. There is another type of grooming, which I say maybe the word doesn't really apply, but that's more a friendship circle, where
which is peers on peers, you're talking
peer on
about.
peer, yeah, and that's very much more what we see really, in that you know, one or two individuals may become highly motivated for personal reasons to the call from Syria. They may have very, very bad home circumstances, very negative ones, but they then exert a strong influence because they often have strong personalities over their friendship circle. So one will go over, and then others will follow.
Okay, on that note, let's touch on 4 young women that actually flee out of London to Syria, and they were attending Bethnal Technology College. As I understand, it is not a local authority school, it is the academy. However, they still have quite a good link with the local authority. Most of the academy will have to have a link with local authority anyway, based on different targets, RPA and everything else, and safeguarding and so on. So now, let's dissect some of the issues. So we had, what we are talking about, and what I gathered from you, these 4 women, they were intelligent.
I will step in just there. These were 15 and 16-year-old girls.
Right.
So rather than young women, we
okay.
treat, and the authorities have been treating them as children and girls.
So these are young children, 4 of them, and they were very intelligent. They were attending school on a regular basis. They were not thrown out of mainstream school. They were not put into alternative education provision. And what I understand, and I've seen some example of that, what I understand, they were in the radar before they flew out of London. They were in the radar of school. They were in the radar within the Met Police. They knew all about it, and to some extent they attempted to communicate with parents. How they tried to do it, or there's a right way or wrong way, that's a different issue. They were in the radar, that is what I understand. However, do we know at this moment that it is a responsibility on local schools or academy? They still will have to report to local authority, children social care, or local area designated officer in relation to safeguarding them. Did Bethnal Technology College ever notify local authority at all?
We don't know whether they did or didn't. They haven't communicated that with us, or the parents of those girls.
Right.
One of those girls is now believed to be dead. Their families still don't know whether or not the school did or did not do that, and if they did, we don't know when.
So that's an interesting one, isn't it? So where you got 2 institutions, police, you got institution, school, were fully aware in terms of their movement. They had a meeting, I believe, prior to their flying out to Syria. Did they have a meeting with all 4 of them on a one-to-one basis?
Yes, well, they had a meeting. The schools were present. We don't know in what capacity, but this meeting took place in the school, and it happened on a couple of occasions. Bizarrely, it happened in a communal environment, so it wasn't just these 3 girls. There was a girl in December who'd gone off to Syria. Because of that, the school were notified in December that this girl has believed to have gone to Syria. Her friendship circle was identified, so there was at least 7 other girls who were identified as close to this first girl. They were rounded up within the school. The police and social worker from the school were present, and those girls were questioned and engaged with by police without the knowledge of their parents.
Okay.
You know, that happened on a number of occasions without the knowledge of the parents.
Can you actually do that? I mean, you are talking
I don't
about
believe you.
14 to 16 years old, they are underage children, and actually, as you classified rightly so, they are children. Now, very many different institutional representatives interviewing them, having a meeting with them on a one-to-one basis, without letting the parents know, without letting any community leaders know, without getting in touch with the mosque. It very clearly makes sense, isn't it? Why prevent agenda is to some extent not attracting, because they didn't bother to communicate with anyone in the community.
Leaving aside the mosque, it's just their parents at the very beginning. I mean, one girl has gone off to Syria. She successfully managed to leave. She has disappeared. There's a missing persons report. Either her friends were involved in helping her, or at least they're in danger of following her. Now, that's a danger whatever happens around a child.
Sure.
And even where children have committed terrible crimes, terrible crimes, even Jamie Bulger, for example.
Absolutely.
When they're being questioned by police, an appropriate adult must be
Must
present.
be present.
What
And are you saying they weren't appropriate adult one was not available?
I would argue that they weren't.
Okay.
They weren't present. There was.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
It's shocking. And it appears that the school social worker represented as an appropriate adult, but we don't know that for sure. She was certainly there.
Do we know that in this case, because you mentioned school social worker
Yes.
were involved
They were.
during the interview and so on,
Yes.
was there at any time the common assessment framework, CAF, actually triggered?
We're not aware of that. All we are aware of is that the social worker was present when the police were questioned. Now, what is bizarre about that is that a number of girls are being questioned at the same time. That would never happen in a normal investigation. They would be separated out so that there's
It
no...
should have been conducted one-to-one.
Of course.
Yeah.
Even from a policing point of view, you don't want cross-contamination of evidence.
Yeah.
Just from a common sense point of view, they shouldn't have been questioned together. Now, even if, and they were, a social worker has to act as an appropriate adult to each individual, but they can't be doing that when they're all being questioned together, because there must be conflicts there. So it's completely inappropriate to the police and totally inappropriate to the school social worker to have presided over such a questioning and an activity.
So that also correlates what you were talking about before in terms of prevent agenda, why it's not actually embedded in the Muslim community and wider community and so on. Because what you just told me, the police involved, social worker involved, school involved, but actually it could actually classify as a collective failure.
Well, one of the theories is that because of this type of questioning, because the girls were now made aware that they would be questioned formally, and their parents were to be notified, that may have actually triggered them to actually leave,
Right.
for fear of not answering questions against their friend. So we're now, there is an operational theory that this was certainly something that either triggered or pushed forward their plans to cause them to go.
Apparently, I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? You're talking about Bethnal Green Technology College, which won the national award, I believe, or
Yes.
something, as a high achieving school. I think the head teacher is quite well known as a czar, basically, to sort mess out. That's why he was hired from Newham to Tower Hamlets at a stage, because the school was in disarray well before he appointed. And so what we are talking about here is school fully aware of it, police aware of it, young women just flew out of this country, gone to Syria, they were aware of it, but actually parents were at no stage, no one bothered to notify parents at all.
No, it wasn't that. They were specifically excluded from any information by purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
By purpose.
So it was, yes, by purpose.
Right.
So it was.
So parents could have actually safeguarded them if they knew about it.
Well, if they had the information, they
Right.
would have been in a better
But they
position.
didn't have the information.
No, if they'd had the information that a close friend of their daughter has gone to Syria, they at least would have been able to secure their passports. You know, the school can't do anything about that. So at least if they told the parents, be aware, we have this, we have belief.
They could have kept the
They could
passports
at least
somewhere.
kept the passports. Put them under lock and key. You don't need a ward of court or anything like that to deal with it. You just need sensible parents to keep an eye on their children. Now, the reason why our community is suspicious of issues like Prevent and even the police when it comes to counterterrorism is because we had a Trojan horse inquiry specifically targeting Muslim schools, many of them, across the north of England.
Including Birmingham and so on.
Indeed. The sum total of that was not very much
Right.
at all. huge inquiry, massive splash in the press. Did any child from any of the schools go to ISIS? Answer, no. One school, a government flagship school, yeah, has lost 4 children to ISIS over a period of months, and also had 4 more children, 5 maybe, put on safeguarding through the wards of court system, going to court. That's 8 kids. There's been no institution in the Western Hemisphere that's lost more people to ISIS than a government flagship school, yet no inquiry.
That's very shocking, actually, to hear that these women's young girls, they were in the radar of schools and different institutions, and again, local authority were not notified, and yet there is a local designated social worker was available in the school. No common assessment framework. We do not know whether common assessment framework is done or not. But this is a practice. It's been embedded throughout the country to make sure we do the common assessment framework to trigger if young people are at risk or likely to be at risk. So you're talking about early identification and prevention, and also intervention. And I think on both cases, early identification and prevention is failed thoroughly.
Well, in fairness to the school, under questioning, the headmaster confirmed, that's Mr. Kiri, that they had applied the prevent strategy to the T as it stood then. And out of the 7 indicators of extremism that the prevent strategy had outlined for schools to look out for, all of the girls involved, including the ones that left, only featured in one, which was that they were wearing the hijab. Now, the idea that a young adolescent girl...
Well, they were not, just to clarify, they were not wearing niqab, were they? They were wearing hijab,
none
right?
of them wore niqab. Okay. Only hijab. And that's one of the indicators in the prevent.
So that triggered them off, that they might be radicalized.
Well, no, that's pretty much every girl of that age in the school wears a hijab.
Right.
So as an indicator, it's useless.
Okay.
So effectively, it's like saying if somebody starts to wear fashionable clothing, then that would be an indicator of extremism. In fact, Tower Hamlets, soon after the girls left, put out a leaflet to teachers and parents, suggesting that one of the indicators that people are being radicalized is that they were doing better at school academically, which is, thankfully that leaflet was withdrawn quite quickly.
Okay.
But the idea that kids going to school are doing better at school academically, secular education...
Then tempted to go to Syria.
How
does it correlate?
It shows the complete lack of any sort of thinking in this issue. And again, the issue of trust is simply... the community sees that it is under extreme focus when it comes to being Muslim or Muslim issues, when there's no real smoke there. But when we've got a raging fire inside a BGA, where's the inquiry? We had Madeleine McGann, one girl who was lost under suspicious circumstances.
Sure.
And we've had huge amounts of resources poured into
the whole international media.
And rightly so, because it's a young girl who's gone missing.
Absolutely.
But when we've got a number of young girls, one of which is now feared dead, where is the inquiry? There is simply no...
Interestingly, I'm coming to a conclusive question now. Sure. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you about, what we hear now, that young people obviously may well be radicalized. We cannot say the young people will not be radicalized because we know there are different groups operating undercover and so on. And I think it is a collective responsibility for the community as well as an active citizen to make sure that we inform institution and authority to flag it up. However, we understand that now the young people are not going to go to Syria. We know that because it's a war zone. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean radicalization will be reduced, because what we understand from the ISIS message recently, they're saying, don't bother coming to Syria, create mayhem wherever you are. So that is a significant message they are giving out. So what do you think as a community, as an institution, as a police, how can we actually work together? Doesn't look like we work together collectively as a community and so on. How can we work together to prevent this kind of things happening in the future?
Well, that's right. I mean, government professes that it doesn't want our kids to be radicalized and risk their lives. And we as parents and we as a community certainly don't want our kids to put themselves into danger or be radicalized. So whether government's working or not efficiently in this is irrelevant to us as parents. Yes. We need to know ourselves, what can we do to combat this danger? Now, the reality is it all comes down to communication. None of the parents involved in these horrible affairs were in any way radical, in any way at all. they're from fairly different backgrounds, and yet their children all suffer the same issue. The one common theme is that they weren't fully conversant with what was happening in those girls' lives. And that's common to all teenagers. Anyone who has a child who's in their teens will know it's very difficult to get any information out of them about who their friends are, what they actually get up to, what's going on in their lives. But it's our responsibility as parents that we make it.
As a community as well.
As
I mean,
communities.
as you said before rightly, it's everyone's responsibility actually.
It is, but the point of contact is with the parents.
Parents.
It must be that the parents create an environment at home where when children have issues, they talk about it with their parents. They feel comfortable to do so. Now, our community is well known for maybe not engaging with the younger generation so much, but that has to change in this environment because there are so many dangers, and not so much ISIS, but also in terms of sexual predators out there, in terms of drugs, in terms of anything. It's just good parenting to be knowing and speaking to your children about all risks, all issues.
Thank you, Mr. Akunjee. Thank you for your time and giving us a good food for thoughts, really. And there is, hopefully, we'll be spreading this news to the community and making sure that we as a community, the message is really we as a community to work together with very many different institutions, regardless whether local authority been proactive or not. It is about community being proactive. It is about parents being proactive. It is about friends and peers being proactive. If we see our friends, our children, or if we see our students at risk, that we need to flag it up in order to safeguard them. That is the bottom line of the message, isn't it?
In a safe way.
Yeah, and obviously we need to, as a community, to learn a bit more how we can embrace Prevent Agenda, or perhaps advise government if there is anything that we have in terms of reservation about the Prevent Agenda, so that perhaps we can actually welcome the Prevent Agenda, because it looks like Prevent Agenda actually becoming more important than ever before.
Well, when it comes to government and local communities, that's a dynamic relationship. And so those institutions like our mosques, masjids, social charities, they have the trust of the community already. They're the ports of call. Government, if it wants to engage with our community, has to engage with those establishments, whether they are particularly fond of them or not, really. And there's a dynamic relationship. There's give and take on both sides. So far, in terms of this whole counter-terrorism, extremism issue, there's been only force and no listening. There's been no adherence to feedback from the community. And they haven't even engaged with the community. East London Mosque is one of the biggest mosques in Europe. It's sitting on the doorstep right here. Many of the families involved in this go to East London Mosque in order to get advice about what to do. So clearly they're a port of call. Government are not engaged with them. The question is, why not?
Thank you very much. Thank you. We come to the end of the program, and as I understand, Prevent Agenda is not necessarily only focusing on Muslim community, and we mustn't interpret that Prevent Agenda actually is designed only focusing on Muslim communities. It's actually focusing on tackling any form of hate crime, any form of radicalization, any form of extremism, and extremism doesn't only stay in Muslim community, and radicalization doesn't only stay in Muslim community. We have seen in different communities. We have seen in America, Timothy McVeigh and everything else, all these stories, and so on. So I think what we really need to look forward to is what we learn from the lawyer. Thank you very much for your contribution. What we learn, it is a collective responsibility. We as a parent, we as a guardian, we as an active citizen, and also very many different institutions that include police, that include schools, as well as local authority. We all have fundamental collective responsibility to ensure that we do whatever is necessary in order to play a proactive role, if it is necessary, to safeguard our children and young people. And that's where we are ending our program, but we hope at some stage we will be bringing more guests and also explore about Prevent Agenda and how it has been accepted in very many different communities, and how communities actually reacting in terms of government prevent proposal and so on. That's what we expect to do in the future program. Thank you very much. Thank you.